Thank you for coming today. I'm here to talk about two things. One, an experience that I've been through which began in the year 2004 and kind of took the better part of a decade to pass through. And then a new idea for a new project that I came up with during these years. And that's what I'm doing moving forward. Basically, the essence of the story is that I started one of the first internet service providers in New York, where I'm from. It started in 1994. I had a whole kind of sort of like a duality going on where I had a number of commercial clients, companies you might have heard of Mitsubishi Motors and IKEA, Tanqueray Gin, things like that. But then I also had a lot of independent media organizations and NGOs and nonprofit groups who were really the organizations that I enjoyed working with. And that's why I would give them access for free. That was really my goal going into this since I was very young when I started and an idealist. I thought that the internet was a way to change the world. So I wanted to give a leg up to people doing things that I thought were interesting or worthwhile. In the year 2004, I got a telephone call at my office. I was sitting at my desk. The caller on the line identified themselves as being from the FBI. And they said that they would be coming by my office with a letter. Or they actually said that I would be getting a letter. I don't think they specified how. I wasn't sure if this was a joke or if it was for real, but I didn't feel that concerned about it at that moment, so I said, okay, thank you, and I hung up. A couple of hours later, there was that official knock at the door, and an actual agent arrived at my office and pulled out a letter, handed it to me, and the letter demanded that I hand over an extensive amount of information on one of the clients of my internet service provider. The agent really wasn't very forthcoming. I had some questions immediately upon reading the letter. When I got to the third or the fourth paragraph in the letter, it said that I could never tell anyone that I had received the letter or had been approached by the FBI. And I looked at the agent and I asked something to the effect of, well, what about my lawyer? And the agent didn't really answer my question or give me any guidance. The agent just kind of shrugged and asked me to sign a receipt saying that I had acknowledged receiving this letter. So I didn't know what to do at that point, but I thought about it for a while, and I knew that I always had the right to an attorney, no matter what I had been told in this letter. And after doing some research, I tried to research. The letter referenced parts of the federal code and executive orders and all kinds of arcane bits of US law. I decided that I really wasn't up to completely understanding all the law that went into this letter. And so I called my attorney, despite the letter saying I could never tell anyone. As luck would have it, one of the NGOs that I worked with on a pro bono basis was an organization called the New York Civil Liberties Union. It's a branch of the American Civil Liberties Union, which is an organization that was started in the early 20th century, and it essentially does a lot of litigative work on behalf of individuals whose rights have been violated. That turned out to be a very beneficial thing for me because I had contacts there, and they invited me, when I explained along with my attorney about the letter I'd gotten, they invited me to come over immediately. We ended up filing a lawsuit against the federal government, naming the Attorney General and the Department of Justice and the FBI as defendants, and challenging the legality of part of the USA Patriot Act, which was a law passed immediately after September 11th, 2001. A lot of people think that that law was a bit of an emotional overreaction to the terror attacks of that year. It essentially gave American law enforcement everything they had ever asked for and more. It essentially, in a lot of ways, allowed them to write their own warrants without going before a judge, without proving probable cause or meeting any of the basic legal tests that are specified in the American Constitution in order to perform a search. As it turned out, I didn't know when we filed this lawsuit that it would end up lasting so long. It ended up lasting about 6 or 7 years, depending on how you count. And the awkward part about it was that I wasn't able to be identified as the plaintiff in the case, so I was called John Doe in all court papers, and my company was called John Doe, Inc. Subsequently, due to this non-disclosure provision in the law and in the letter that I received, I wasn't able to tell anyone that I knew that I was the plaintiff in this case. So, and that goes all up and down from my colleagues at work to my parents to girlfriends that I lived with or whoever, friends, anyone. I kept it a secret this whole time. What happened was, in 2004, the law was found to be unconstitutional. A judge ruled that it violated the US Constitution in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of the rules on searches, and in terms of the rules concerning due process. Because if you can't tell anyone that you've received the letter, that means that you can't go to court. You can't tell the court clerk, you can't tell a judge, you can't tell a lawyer, you can't tell anyone. It said, don't tell any person. That's illegal. Now, in the wake of this judge finding that this law violated the Constitution and the basic rights enshrined therein, the Congress made the Justice Department audit its use of national security letters. And through that audit, it was uncovered that there was a lot of abuse of this provision of the law. Since the authorities no longer had to go to court and prove probable cause in order to get warrants, they were using them quite liberally. And in the Inspector General's report, it turned out that they had put out something like 300,000 of these letters in a multiple year period, 3 to 4 year period. In the United States, there are roughly 300 million citizens. So the ratio there was something like 1 letter per 1,000 Americans. However, some information that came out through this audit was that the letters didn't always have a one-to-one relationship between a letter and a person. One of the famous examples was the FBI had reason to believe something bad might happen in Las Vegas, New Year's Eve, one year, I think 2004. With one letter, they got the list of every person who had visited New Year's Eve over that time period. It was like over a weekend, I believe. That turned out to be hundreds of thousands of people. It's a popular thing that people do sometimes. So there isn't necessarily a one-to-one relationship. If there was a one-to-one relationship, it would be 1 to 1,000 people. If there's more, then it could be 1 to 500 people, or 1 to 250 people, or maybe 1 to 100 people. It's really hard to say. You're sort of left to speculate because most of the information about how these letters have been used is top secret. There's no ability to have a public discussion about the efficacy of the use of these techniques because when they do have hearings and in our Congress about it, they shut the doors and they don't publicize the minutes. As time went on, the Congress called the FBI director in and had him testify as to their use of these letters, and he testified that they had not properly kept track of all the letters they had been handing out. They claimed that there was some problem with their database and that they had figured out that they had undercounted the number of the letters by 22%, which I found a bit strange, because if they didn't have records, then how could they come up with such an exact figure? It wasn't like 25%, roughly a quarter, or it was 22%. In the end, though, nothing really happened in terms of no heads rolled, no one was fired, no one is really held to account. But a lot of this information became public, which was a good thing, because it sort of helped the goal of there being more transparency and more open discussion and more awareness of what was going on. I had to sit through all this stuff silently and just sort of think to myself about it, because I couldn't talk to anyone. And sometimes I make the analogy that it's like the man that climbs up to the top of the mountain and just sits there alone and tries to become enlightened, because I had no one to talk to about it. So everything was an internal dialogue in my mind. And one of the questions that I thought about a lot was, why weren't the telecommunications companies doing something about this abuse, since it became apparent that there was a ton of it going on? And it seemed that I was the only person from the telecommunications industry who was taking a proactive and sort of aggressive stance to try to stop it. But I did understand somewhat about the nature of corporations, especially publicly held corporations. They have a lot of public relations concerns. And if you understand the political machinations of what was going on after September 11th, there was like a huge surge in patriotism and an unwillingness among Americans to question the government, and sort of feeling that we have to just grin and bear it and give up whatever we're asked to give up in order to be safe. And on the other hand, companies were afraid to offend the general public who were caught up in this surge of patriotism, so they generally just went along with things. There was an interview I did for the New York Times, and then later I read that they'd interviewed other people, and one of them was the general counsel from the FBI, who claimed that all the phone companies considered it good corporate citizenship to just hand over whatever information was requested from them. Later, there was a big scandal revealed that the NSA, which is kind of a military spy agency in America, had been spying on the entire telephone system, both domestic and international, within America. It became apparent when someone discovered a secret room inside of a telephone central office building. And it actually became noticeable because of union disputes, because guys that were non-union were going inside and doing work on this machinery, and some union guys were like, hey, you're crossing, you're not allowed to do that. And it's kind of funny how it came to pass. But this was an explosive revelation, because it basically demonstrated that everything was being captured. All voice and internet traffic was being essentially split. One half of it would go to its intended destination, the other half would go to the NSA, who would then presumably capture it, although we don't know exactly what they do with it, because it's, of course, top secret. A couple of years into my case, there was another plaintiff who read that the judge had ruled this law unconstitutional, and they also sued the government, and they became my co-plaintiffs. And I only found out years later who they were, because I was referred to as New York John Doe, and they were Connecticut John Doe collectively. It turned out years later that they were a group of librarians who had also been approached by the FBI, and the FBI had been seeking library patron records. which the FBI had sworn up and down, it had sworn that it did not spy on libraries. It turned out that they were. They were trying to figure out what everyone was reading. The librarians in America are borderline militant. I mean, they're really amazing, but they're like very respectable people as well. I mean, you can't question their integrity. They're clearly doing things for the right reason, and they got ungagged after about 9 months by accident because someone forgot to redact one of their names. So they ended up becoming sort of the public face of this battle. It was a really good thing for me because I thought that librarians were just a better spokespeople for freedom than internet people who I kind of thought were dirtbags. So I decided to start basically a nonprofit organization whose goal is to reform telecommunications. I thought, why isn't there someone in telecommunications that's the rough equivalent of the librarians? Someone that's in it for ideological reasons as opposed to the profit motive. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is starting both an internet service provider and a mobile provider, which integrates privacy technology at the lowest level so that your telephone comes with encrypted voice software and encrypted SMS technology. Your internet service provider automatically encrypts email, automatically encrypts all of your data to make it more difficult for the data to be captured en masse. Of course, it can be captured on an individualized basis if you go to a judge and show probable cause, which is sort of the scenario that is supposed to be followed in the United States. So I brought together a group of people who is really quite a diverse group. Some of the people are from the civil liberties world, some are from the foundation world, some are from the legal academy. And actually there's one guy in there who's the former technical director of the NSA, because as it turns out, it's sort of a mistake to view the government as a monolithic entity, or even the intelligence agencies as monolithic. They're groups of people with varying opinions. You just don't happen to hear the dissenting opinions while people continue to work at these jobs. But once they're retired, it turns out that some of them don't agree with the things that have been going on. So I'm working in partnership with a number of open source software developers who develop encryption technology. And the big challenge that we're trying to do is to take tools that hackers and researchers out there use on a daily basis to encrypt and secure all their traffic and make them accessible to normal people who are not researchers or hackers. Basically, I'm going to have to speed through this quickly, but the internet provider essentially encrypts all data and tries to make sure that the client is the only person holding the keys to decrypt the data. That means that the service provider can't be forced to turn it over. This is actually allowed under US law. I've done a bit of research on it with some law students and lawyers in America. The same thing with the mobile provider. All encryption is to be performed on the user's mobile device, and all keys will be stored on their mobile device. Again, it should be possible to decrypt it if necessary by going to the user and getting their key, but it would make it basically extremely difficult, if not impossible, to decrypt the whole service provider's traffic. Essentially, right now, we're at a very early stage. We've just done a whole fundraising campaign and like a crowdsourced fundraising thing. We've raised almost $100,000, but we need to raise about $2 million. So I'm going around, traveling around with a PowerPoint presentation and talking to foundations and talking to angel donors and potential backers. Up here is the Twitter handle if you want to follow up on our progress. And there's my email address as well if you want to follow up with me. And after this talk, I'd be happy to chat with anyone that wants to know a little bit more about either what happened or what I'm going to do in the future. Thank you.